Entire orphanage vanished in 1982. 30 years later, a hidden room shocked investigators. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, a persistent drizzle that seemed to mirror Sarah Manning's growing unease. She stood on the edge of a forgotten dirt road, staring at the rusted gates of what was once a thriving institution, now a shell of its former self. The name on the weather-beaten sign, St. Catherine's Orphanage, was barely legible, but it didn't matter. Sarah had heard the stories, the whispers. It was here 3 decades ago that everything began to unravel. It was 1982 when everything changed. The year her mother, Linda Manning, went into premature labor at St. Catherine's, only to be told hours later that her newborn son had died. No questions, no explanations, just a simple cold clinical dismissal. But Sarah never believed it. For years she had lived with the nagging suspicion that something had gone terribly wrong. And when she finally found the old, dusty photographs in her mother's attic, pictures of a child who bore an uncanny resemblance to her, everything she thought she knew about her family's past was suddenly called into question. Sarah's brother had vanished that night, and the truth had been buried along with him. It wasn't until Sarah started digging into the past, searching through old medical records, talking to former employees, and uncovering bits of a long-forgotten investigation, that she stumbled upon the first clue. A name, Pine Valley Research Institute. A dead end on the surface, the institute seemed like just another obscure research facility located far off in the woods. But the deeper Sarah dug, the stranger things became. People spoke of it in hushed tones, and the few who dared to talk often mentioned the same eerie details: abandoned medical records experiments that shouldn't have been happening, and the chilling rumors of children disappearing without a trace. That's when Sarah learned about the other missing children. Children who had been taken from homes across the country, their identities wiped from existence. Some had been labeled as dead, others as runaway or lost. But Sarah discovered they all had one thing in common: they had been sent to Pine Valley. As Sarah pored over the files she had gathered, a pattern began to emerge. She found references to names of children. Some of them had been born the same year as her brother, some just before. The most unsettling part, each of them had vanished just like him. And they all had one thing in common: they had been enrolled, or in some way connected, to the same research facility. Pine Valley Research Institute. The more Sarah uncovered, the more questions arose. But what made her pause wasn't just the chilling discovery of her brother's possible survival. It was the discovery of other children. Children who had been experimented on. Children who had been stolen. This wasn't a simple case of a missing child anymore. This was much darker. It had been 6 months since she first uncovered the name Pine Valley, but Sarah had already lost count of how many sleepless nights she'd spent trying to put the pieces together. Each day her determination grew stronger. She had to know what happened to her brother, and she had to expose whatever darkness Pine Valley was hiding. But the deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. A phone call came just after dusk, breaking the silence in her apartment. "Deputy Manning," the voice on the other end said. It was Miller, her contact at the sheriff's office. "You've found something, haven't you?" His voice had a note of urgency, but also something else: caution. Sarah swallowed hard. "I think I've found the facility," she said, voice steady. "I need to go there." The Pine Valley Research Institute was not easy to find. A winding road snaked its way through a dense thicket of trees, leading to an isolated and decaying building that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. But appearances could be deceiving. It had been 5 years since anyone had heard of Pine Valley. The government had closed it down after an official investigation, but Sarah soon learned that it had never truly been abandoned. People still worked there. The facility still operated in secret. She had received anonymous tips telling her about the underground research happening at Pine Valley, about the untraceable disappearances. But there was no official record, no trace. Whoever had taken the children had covered their tracks well. On the afternoon Sarah arrived, the gray sky hung heavy with clouds, an oppressive feeling of foreboding settling over her. The building loomed in front of her, an old brick structure, its windows shattered and covered with grime. It looked as if it had been left to rot for years. Yet as she approached, Sarah noticed a few key details that made her pause. The parking lot, although cracked and overgrown with weeds, showed signs of recent activity. The cameras mounted on poles around the perimeter, the faint hum of machinery inside the sound of voices. Something was happening inside. It wasn't abandoned after all. Her pulse quickened. As Sarah pulled her car to a stop, she glanced at her watch. 1 hour and 43 minutes since she had first uncovered the photo of her mother's disappearance. In just 17 minutes, Miller was supposed to call in federal backup. But Sarah had a different plan. If she was walking into a trap, she wanted to make sure that everything was documented. Hidden inside her jacket, she carried a small digital recorder, an old one she had found in her apartment, the kind used by reporters for interviews. If she was going to uncover the truth, she needed proof. When she reached the main entrance, Sarah was met by a man in a white lab coat. He was middle-aged, balding, and unremarkable in every way. "Deputy Manning," he said, his voice almost friendly. "I'm Dr. Phillips. We've been expecting you." Sarah tried not to show her surprise. She had known the facility was secretive, but this was a bit too coordinated for her comfort. "Where's my mother?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Safe for the moment," Phillips answered smoothly. "Do you have the documents?" Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to give him any leverage, but her gut told her she had no choice. She reached inside her jacket and pulled out the envelope containing Thornfield's papers, handing them to Dr. Phillips. "I want to see her first." Phillips nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. "Of course. Please follow me." Inside the building, Sarah was struck by the contrast. The walls were immaculate, the floors shining with the sterile, clinical brightness of a modern medical facility. The smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. The place might have looked abandoned from the outside, but inside it was a different world. They walked down several hallways, Sarah's boots clicking on the polished linoleum as she followed Dr. Phillips. "You know," Phillips said, conversationally breaking the silence, "your investigation has caused quite a stir. 30 years of careful work, and you managed to unravel it in a matter of days." Sarah stopped in her tracks. "Careful work," she repeated, her voice growing colder. "Is that what you call stealing babies and murdering children?" Phillips paused in front of a security door, swiping a key card to open it. "We prefer to think of it as advancing human understanding," he said, as if the words were rehearsed. "The research conducted here has contributed to breakthroughs in psychology, neurology, and behavioral science. Breakthroughs that have benefited countless people." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "Research conducted on stolen children," she spat. "Children who would have grown up in poverty and broken homes with no opportunities," Phillips said matter-of-factly as they stepped into an elevator. "Here they've contributed to something larger than themselves." Sarah's fists clenched at her sides. She had heard enough, but she knew she was far from the truth. The elevator descended, the slow hum of machinery in the walls vibrating beneath Sarah's feet. Each floor that passed seemed to bring her deeper into the heart of Pine Valley, a place that until now had existed only in whispers and shadowed corners. She had read the reports, heard the rumors, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. Dr. Phillips remained silent, his eyes forward, as the doors slid open, revealing a long, sterile hallway. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting an artificial pallor to the space. Everything was too clean, too controlled, as though the building itself was designed to hide something. Sarah's pulse quickened. She had seen too much of this kind of control, this kind of cold efficiency before. It was the same at any research facility, but this was something different. "This way," Dr. Phillips said, gesturing to the left. They walked in silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, but it was tinged with something else, a faint, almost imperceptible metallic odor that Sarah couldn't place. Her instincts screamed at her to turn around to leave, but she couldn't. Not now, not when she was so close. Dr. Phillips led her to a door marked Secure Wing, the label affixed in simple black text. He slid his key card through the reader, and the door clicked open with a mechanical groan. Inside, the atmosphere was entirely different. The hallway was dim, illuminated by low-light fixtures that seemed intentionally set to create a sense of unease. The walls were lined with unmarked doors, their contents hidden behind heavy steel. The air was thick, almost oppressive. Sarah felt the weight of something sinister pressing in on her, but she refused to let it deter her. Phillips led her past several doors, each one sealed tight with no windows or visible identification until they reached the end of the hall. He stopped in front of the final door and turned to her. "This is where you'll find her." Sarah's throat tightened. She had been ready for this moment for years, but the reality of it, standing in front of the place that had held her mother captive for so long, was overwhelming. Is she okay?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Phillips hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She's stable. We've taken good care of her." His tone was eerily calm, almost like he was reciting a script. Sarah didn't believe him. She could see it in his eyes, the unease that he tried so hard to hide. There was something here. Something is wrong. He keyed in another passcode, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside the room was small but well lit, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic. At first glance, it looked like a standard hospital room, white linens, a small bed, and a single chair beside it. But as Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw the details that made her blood run cold. Her mother, Linda Manning, lay on the bed, but she wasn't asleep. She was staring at the ceiling, her eyes, unblinking, her face, gaunt and pale. The years of captivity had left their mark on her. The woman Sarah remembered strong, loving, full of life was gone. In her place was a shell, a broken version of the person Sarah had once called Mom. Mom, Sarah's voice cracked as she stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman on the bed didn't react at first, but then slowly her eyes shifted to Sarah, and a flicker of recognition passed across her face. Sarah Linda's voice was weak, hoarse, as though it had been years since she last spoke. "Is it really you?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she knelt beside the bed. "It's me, Mom. I found you. I'm here." For a long moment, Linda simply stared at her as though unable to comprehend what was happening. Then with a shaky hand, she reached out and touched Sarah's face. They told me you were dead," her voice faltered. "They said I had to forget you, Sarah. They said I had to let go." Sarah's heart broke. The years of pain, of loss, were written all over Linda's face. "I never stopped looking for you, Mom. I never gave up." Linda's eyes fluttered shut for a moment, as though the weight of everything was too much to bear. When she opened them again, there was a clarity in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "They took me, Sarah. They took us all." Linda's voice was barely audible, but Sarah could hear the depth of the terror in her words. "They made us forget. They made me forget." It was as though the dam had finally broken. Linda began to speak in broken sentences, telling Sarah what little she could remember. The years she spent in the facility, the experiments, the endless tests. She described the people who had been there, others who had been taken from their families, children who had been stolen away and brought to Pine Valley for some twisted, unspoken purpose. There were others, Sarah, so many others. Linda's eyes welled with tears. "They're still here, aren't they?" Sarah nodded, her mind racing. She had to get them all out, all of them. But before she could say anything more, the soft sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Sarah froze instinctively, stepping closer to the bed to shield her mother. Dr. Phillips appeared in the doorway, his face set in a mask of calm professionalism, but there was a hint of tension in his posture. "I think it's time we had a little conversation, Deputy Manning." The way he said it, like a threat wrapped in pleasantries, sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She stood up slowly, eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but edged with suspicion. Dr. Phillips smiled thinly. "I think you know what I mean." He took a step forward. "You've seen enough. You've uncovered too much. But you're still missing the most important part of the story, Sarah. The part that explains everything." Sarah's pulse quickened as her thoughts scrambled to make sense of his words. The most important part of the story. What was he talking about? Before she could respond, Dr. Phillips turned to Linda. You know, Mrs. Manning, it's a pity your daughter had to learn about the past this way. Linda's face twisted in confusion and fear. What do you mean? What have you done to her? Dr. Phillips ignored her and looked back at Sarah. There are things you don't understand yet. Things that the public could never know. This facility, the research, it was for the greater good. We had to make difficult choices, sacrifices, but it was all for a purpose. Sarah's head spun. Sacrifices, greater good. She stepped forward, fists clenched at her sides. What do you mean sacrifices? What did you do to those children? What did you do to my brother? Dr. Phillips' smile faded, and for a brief moment Sarah saw something darker in his eyes. A flicker of something that wasn't just cold professionalism. You're not ready for the truth yet, but you will be soon enough. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and threatening. As the silence stretched on, Sarah realized that she wasn't just facing a missing child case anymore. She was standing at the edge of something far bigger, something far darker than she could have ever imagined. And the truth was still hidden somewhere inside Pine Valley, buried in the shadows. And Sarah was going to uncover it, no matter the cost. The silence between Sarah and Dr. Phillips was thick with tension, each word left unsaid, a dagger in the air. Sarah's mind raced. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there was so much more left unexplained. What do you mean, sacrifices? Sarah demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. She was barely holding it together, but she couldn't show weakness, not now. Dr. Phillips' smile returned, though it was colder this time, almost condescending. He seemed to take pleasure in her confusion, her lack of understanding. You don't get it yet, do you? His voice was almost soothing. Pine Valley was never just about research. It was about control, power. And the greater good, as I've said, you'll understand soon enough. His words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Power control. What was he really talking about? Her eyes flicked to her mother. Linda still lying in the bed, her gaze distant. She looked frail, like a woman who had endured more than anyone should ever have to. Sarah's heart broke for her once again. Her mother had been through hell, but it was clear that whatever had happened at Pine Valley had twisted the very fabric of her mind. What are you hiding, Dr. Phillips? Sarah demanded again, stepping closer to him, her voice now laced with anger. He raised a hand in mock surrender. It's not what I'm hiding, Sarah, it's what you're not seeing. He paused for a moment as if savoring the moment of power. Then his tone grew colder. You think you've come here to save them, to rescue your mother. But you're too late. Sarah's chest tightened. Too late. What was he implying? Before she could speak, Dr. Phillips turned and walked toward the door. I think you need to see something. He glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. Something that will explain everything. Sarah hesitated for a moment. Every instinct screamed at her to stay with her mother to protect her. But she knew she had no choice. If she was going to get to the truth, she had to follow him. I'm coming with you. Sarah's voice was firm. Dr. Phillips didn't respond, merely stepped aside and gestured for her to follow. Sarah's heart raced as she moved to the door. The room felt suffocating now, her mother's soft breathing the only sound in the quiet. As they exited, Sarah noticed the sterile, almost clinical atmosphere of Pine Valley once again. It seemed to stretch on forever, endless hallways, locked doors, and a sense of oppression that hung over everything. Every step they took felt like a step further into a labyrinth, a maze of secrets that had been buried for years. Dr. Phillips led her down another corridor, taking turns and twisting through the hallways in what felt like an intentional attempt to disorient her. The facility was massive, its design efficient, yet sinister. Sarah could hear the faint sounds of other voices, but the silence between them was more oppressive than anything else. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in. They stopped in front of another steel door, far more secure than the others. The keypad was locked with a thick bolt, and a sign above the door read, "Restricted Area." Sarah's stomach dropped. What could be beyond that door? Dr. Phillips turned to her, his face unreadable. This is where the real research was done. He entered a code into the keypad, and the door clicked open. As it creaked open, a cold gust of air rushed out, and Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. What had they done in there? She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes adjusting to the dim lighting. The room was vast, more like a warehouse than a lab. Rows of tall metal cabinets lined the walls, and large steel tables stood in the center, some still covered with instruments she couldn't quite identify. The faint scent of chemicals lingered in the air, making her nauseous. Dr. Phillips walked ahead, stopping at one of the large tables. He turned back to Sarah, his face hardening. "This is where we conducted the real experiments." His eyes gleamed with a cold, detached pride. On the subjects, on the children. It was necessary. We needed to understand the human mind, how far we could push it. We needed to know what they could endure. Sarah recoiled, disgust twisting in her gut. "You experimented on them. These were children." He nodded, the expression on his face almost clinical, as though what he was saying wasn't horrific. "They were necessary subjects, Sarah. There was no other way to study the long-term effects of psychological manipulation, sensory deprivation trauma. We had to know how far they could go before they broke." Her mind reeled. It was beyond comprehension. She thought of the children she had read about, the ones who had been stolen, taken from their families, and brought here for the experiments. They were nothing more than pawns in some twisted game, and now standing in the very heart of the place, Sarah realized that these subjects weren't just research participants. They were victims. Dr. Phillips continued, unbothered by Sarah's outrage. "We found what we were looking for, the limits of the human psyche, the breaking point, and of course we learned much about the mind's ability to adapt, about how to control the narrative, how to erase memories." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Erase memories." He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "You see, Sarah, we didn't just study the effects of isolation and trauma. We learned how to control them, to manipulate their memories, their thoughts, to make them forget what was real." Sarah stepped back, her mind spinning. She couldn't grasp it all. How could something like this have been allowed to go on for so long? How could they have justified this kind of torture in the name of research? Dr. Phillips gave a dark chuckle, as though he could read her thoughts. "You're shocked, but you shouldn't be. This is how things are done, how progress is made." He paused, his eyes gleaming. "You wanted to find your mother, Sarah, but what you really wanted was to find the truth. Well, now you have it." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah stood there for a long moment, the enormity of the truth crashing over her. She had come here to rescue her mother, to bring her home. But now she realized that the fight was far bigger than that. This wasn't just about her mother, it was about all of them. The children who had been taken, the lives that had been destroyed in the name of research. And now Sarah was faced with a terrible choice: leave and save who she could, or risk everything to expose the truth to the world. But in that moment, as she stood in the heart of Pine Valley, Sarah knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back. The room felt like it was closing in on Sarah, the walls pressing in with every passing second. Dr. Phillips stood just a few feet away, the cruel gleam in his eyes almost too much to bear. She felt trapped, her pulse racing as the weight of the situation pressed down on her chest. But it wasn't fear she felt, at least not entirely. It was something darker, something more dangerous. Revelation. "You think you found it all, Sarah?" Dr. Phillips's voice broke through her thoughts, low and deliberate. "But you've only scratched the surface. You have no idea what you're dealing with." His words echoed around the cold, sterile lab. The metallic surfaces reflected his words like an ominous chorus. He stepped closer, a condescending smile twisting his lips. "The truth. It's bigger than anything you can imagine." Sarah was frozen, her mind spinning. What did he mean? Had she really uncovered everything? Or was there more to this place, more to the experiments, than she could even begin to understand? He continued, sensing her confusion. Pine Valley was built for one thing: the eradication of memories, the manipulation of the mind. Do you really think that everything you've learned about this place is just about trauma? His voice dropped, and there was a chilling sense of satisfaction in his words. That's the surface. The real project was about control, about creating the perfect subjects, the ones who could be molded into anything, the ones who wouldn't remember their pasts or their real identities, the ones who wouldn't even know who they were. Sarah's head spun. Erase memories, create perfect subjects. She remembered Michael, the man who had been called Subject F-23, now revealed as David Michael Manning. She thought of her mother Linda, who had been stolen away from her family, and the others, the lost children, the ones who had been used and discarded in this horrendous experiment. Dr. Phillips continued, his voice taking on a darker edge. You think you're saving them, Sarah, but they've already been lost. They've been programmed, erased, reconditioned. You can't give them their lives back, not now, not after all this time. His words were a sharp blow, each one sinking deeper into her. How could this man say such things with so much certainty? He had become so desensitized to the suffering, so detached from the human cost of it all. But Sarah wasn't about to back down. You're wrong, Dr. Phillips. Her voice shook with conviction, despite the terror swirling in her stomach. I can't undo the past, but I can save them now. I can give them a future. Phillips smirked at her. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Saving the broken souls of Pine Valley, he shook his head. What you don't understand is that they've already been broken. You can't put them back together. The words stung, but Sarah refused to let them break her. She couldn't let him win. The lives of these people, her mother Michael and the others, depended on her. I'm not going to leave them here, Sarah said, her voice resolute. I'll expose you. I'll expose everything you've done, everything this place has done, no matter what it takes. Dr. Phillips' expression darkened. You think you can bring this all to light, that you'll win? The people in charge are untouchable. Do you think anyone is going to believe your story? You've seen the evidence, and yet, here we are with nothing but lies. Sarah felt her heart drop. He was right about one thing. The people who had supported this operation, the ones with power and influence, were out of reach. She couldn't just walk into a courtroom with a stack of evidence and expect it to all be taken at face value. There were too many people in high places who would do anything to cover it up. But something inside Sarah refused to surrender. She couldn't let this go. You can't stop me. Sarah's voice was steady now. This place is going to burn, Phillips, and you'll burn with it. For a brief moment, something flickered in Dr. Phillips's eyes. Fear, no. Perhaps it was just a flicker of doubt. But it was gone as quickly as it had come, replaced by a look of pure contempt. You'll never be able to expose it all, Sarah. His voice was cold. This facility is only the beginning. There are others, and they're all still operating. Pine Valley was just a test. The real network, well, it's far more expansive than you could ever imagine. His words chilled Sarah to the core. Other facilities, more victims, more experiments. The scope of the conspiracy was far greater than she had ever realized. Pine Valley had been just a small piece of a much larger puzzle, and now Sarah was caught in the middle of it. But she couldn't stop now. No matter how deep the web ran, no matter how many obstacles she faced, Sarah would find a way to bring this all to light. She had to. As if sensing her resolve, Dr. Phillips gave one final mocking smile. You'll fail. You always do, Sarah. People like you think you can change the world, but you can't. Sarah's eyes narrowed, her heart thundering. I'm not trying to change the world, Phillips. I'm trying to save these people. And I'll die trying if that's what it takes. The air between them crackled with tension. For a moment, neither spoke. Sarah's mind raced as she thought about her next move. She had to get out of here. She had to find Michael, her mother, and the others, and they had to escape before it was too late. But as Dr. Phillips turned his back, the door to the lab clicked shut behind him. Sarah realized one thing with terrifying clarity. Pine Valley was not just a facility. It was a fortress, a prison in every sense of the word. And escaping it, getting out alive, was going to be a lot harder than she had ever imagined. As the sound of footsteps faded into the distance, Sarah took a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the task ahead of her, the gravity of what she was up against. The truth was out there, but now she had to figure out how to expose it before Dr. Phillips and his network could silence her and the others forever. The corridor outside the lab felt suffocatingly silent after Dr. Phillips's departure. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she moved quickly, her footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. She needed to find Michael, and fast. They had to get out. This place was collapsing in on itself, and there was no time to waste. She turned the corner and saw the dim lights flicker above her, a sign that the emergency backup system was struggling. The whole facility was on edge, and Sarah could feel it in the air. Something was about to break. She had no idea how much longer she had before the entire operation came crashing down. Her radio crackled to life in her pocket. "Sar, are you there?" Miller's voice was tense, urgent. "I'm here," Sarah replied, her voice low but steady. "I'm heading toward the communal area. I need to get Michael and the others out. Now." "Copy that. We've got federal agents on the perimeter, but Phillips has people inside the building. They're going to be looking for you." Sarah cursed under her breath. Phillips wasn't done with her yet. He still had the upper hand, and he wasn't going to let her walk out of here without a fight. "I'll be careful," Sarah said, her eyes scanning the hallway. "But we don't have much time." She picked up her pace, moving quietly, but with urgency. The walls seemed to press in on her as she approached the communal area. She had to get there before Phillips realized what she was doing. She reached the door, the sound of quiet murmurs drifting through the thin metal. She couldn't hear individual words, but the low buzz of conversation told her that the others were still there. Sarah paused, taking a steadying breath. Michael David would be in there, along with the others who had been trapped here for decades. She couldn't imagine what it was like for them, living in constant fear, always under surveillance, never knowing freedom, but she would get them out. Taking one last look around, Sarah slid through the door, stepping into the room. The instant they saw her, the room fell silent. Michael's eyes locked with hers, a flash of recognition and hope flickering in them. She saw the others, some trembling, some staring at her with blank expressions, others too afraid to even look up. "It's time." Michael's voice was quiet but firm. With one swift motion, Sarah pulled out the small hidden keycard that would unlock the next section of the facility, the exit route. They had only minutes before everything went dark. "We're leaving now," Sarah said, her voice clear and commanding. There was a brief hesitation, a moment of uncertainty. Then Michael, standing tall, moved toward her, followed by the others. They began to walk toward the exit, toward the unknown, toward a life they had never known. But they had each other now, and that was all that mattered. The sound of boots grew louder. Panic rippled through the room. The agents were coming. They didn't have much time. Sarah moved quickly, guiding Michael David through the group, urging them to stay close. She could hear the low hum of the security system kicking into high gear, the alarms primed to trigger the lockdown protocol. They needed to move, or they would be trapped inside the facility. There was no way out if the doors sealed. "Stay quiet," Sarah whispered, her voice steady but urgent. "We're almost there. Just follow me." Michael, now fully engaged in the escape, moved beside her, his eyes scanning the others. He seemed to know where everyone was, his instincts sharper than anyone could have anticipated from someone raised in isolation. He had been part of this place for 30 years, but Sarah realized now that he knew it better than anyone. They approached a narrow hallway leading to the emergency exit, the same route she had entered earlier. But as they neared it, the unmistakable sound of keycards swiping echoed through the halls. Guards were getting close. Sarah's pulse quickened. "We're not going to make it if they lock down," she muttered to herself, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The exit was less than 50 feet away. "Keep moving," Michael urged. "I'll lead them off." Before Sarah could respond, Michael stepped away from the group, heading back toward the hallway. He moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between the approaching guards and the others. Michael knows Sarah called after him, but it was too late. Michael had already disappeared down the corridor. "Stay here," she ordered the others. "I'll be back for you." Sarah sprinted toward where she had last seen him, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. She reached the corner just as Michael confronted the guards. "Stop right there," one of the men barked. Michael didn't flinch. He stood tall, his face a mask of calm determination. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The guard hesitated, uncertain. Michael had lived in this place for years. He knew every corner, every escape route. He had been preparing for this moment longer than anyone could realize. The second guard raised his weapon, but Michael lunged. His speed was startling, and within moments he had knocked the guard to the ground. The other hesitated just long enough for Sarah to catch up. "Move!" she shouted, pulling Michael with her. The two guards were stunned, disoriented, but they weren't dead. They'd be after them soon enough. They ran Sarah, Michael, and the others through the narrow hallways, their footsteps a blur in the dark. They reached the exit just as the first wave of reinforcements turned the corner. "Go, go, go," Sarah urged, pushing them all through the door. The fresh air of the outside world was like a shock to her lungs, but it was also a lifeline. They were almost free. But as Sarah turned to see if anyone was left behind, she saw the dark shape of a van speeding toward them. Phillips had made his move. "Get in," she shouted, gesturing to the van parked at the edge of the lot. The door was already open, and Miller was at the wheel waiting for them. They piled into the van, and it sped off, the sounds of the facility of Phillips growing distant. "Did we get everyone?" Miller asked, glancing at Sarah. "Everyone who mattered," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Michael David was beside her, his hand clenched in a fist as he stared out the window as though seeing the world for the first time. His face was pale but resolute. He was free, and for the first time Sarah felt like she could breathe. The nightmare was over. But it wasn't just her nightmare that had ended, it was theirs too.